So Simchat Torah, the joy of the Torah. What does everybody know about Simchat Torah?
I don't really know that much, but when we go to synagogue when I was young, they would have outside. They would build like a little kind of with oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it.
A sukkah?
Oh yeah, that do you know that
Yeah, like the sukkah,
about
like the
that?
3-wall building structure.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to say. And we used to eat apples with honey.
Mm-hmm.
But
Apples with
as
honey for a
far as the
sweet New Year.
holiday goes, what's that?
For a sweet New Year, that honey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Simchat Torah kind of ends these fall feasts that start with, well, kind of start with the preparation for Rosh Hashanah, right? And then leading into Yom Kippur and Feast of Tabernacles. Did I say that in the right order? So Simchat Torah, like I said, it could be called the joy of the Torah. So this idea of rejoicing in the Torah. And the holiday, one place I was reading about it said it's characterized by utterly unbridled joy. And I thought that was such a beautiful phrase. Utterly unbridled joy. Like, when was the last time that any of us felt utterly unbridled joy? I mean, the closest I come to joy is really usually like with Abby and Meadow, just like being wrapped up in their awesomeness, or like when they're born or when they're just particularly awesome. They just bring me a lot of joy. But does anybody have anything in your life that makes you think of like that joy feeling? Or even like, I love watching Abby when we're telling jokes, and her jokes are hilarious because pretty much anything that ends with "do you get it?" could be a joke. So you just start laughing because like you laugh when it's funny and you also laugh when it's not funny. But like she, like, if you watch her and she thinks something is like really particularly funny, you can see it in her eyes and her reaction. It's almost like she explodes for a split second because her eyes get so wide and she's just like, ah! And like she's just like at that limit. And I just love watching that moment. Or I think back to like when I was teaching school, one of the things that the school would do would be auction off that you could be a teacher for a day. So there was this boy who was like a second grader who was very into music. So he wanted to be music teacher for the day. So he auctioned off to be music teacher for the day. So he got to work with me. And I just remember him being in my classroom and like he was so excited and he had to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, it's okay, go to the bathroom. You have plenty of time. And just the way he like zoomed to the door, like it just reminded me when I was a kid too, that unbridled joy when you're so excited about something, you don't even want to stop to go to the bathroom. So you're going to like run and like all that. But yeah, I don't like have those moments necessarily every day. Can anybody think of any moments like that?
Well, my joy are my children. They amaze me. They've turned out so nicely and responsible, and I just get a lot of joy out of that.
That's wonderful. And Amanda said that the closest she gets to utterly unbridled joy is when she's with her friends, but she hasn't had that since she got to visit Toledo in July.
When my oldest daughter got married on Labor Day, and so just the joy. I mean, it was small, and also Emma when she is just laughing, out with joy. She has this snort, the people that laugh snort. So
Yeah.
she's so she's got that. So like when the laugh is genuine, because you can't fake a snort.
Yeah.
And I have another joy is my grandchildren, and they're growing up before my eyes. And the oldest one is driving now, and the youngest one, he's 13. He's funny. He's a funny guy. He plays the euphonium,
That's right. We talked about
and
this
he
because I'm a euphonium
loves
player.
it. He loves that euphonium.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a special kind.
Yeah. I don't know why he had a choice, and that's
Yeah.
what he picked.
It's the most underappreciated instrument. It's the cello
Yeah.
of the band. But yeah, so the holiday characterized by really unbridled joy. It's the Simchat Torah. We celebrate the conclusion. So this is where, if you're following the Torah portions here, you would read the last Torah portion. And they also, within the holiday celebration, they start the next Torah portion. They start back at Genesis to keep it kind of the whole cycle moving. So one aspect of a Simcha celebration is a hakafot. I'm not sure if I'm saying it correct. This idea of marching and dancing with the actual scrolls and fest meals, food, candles, blessings, all those things that you see at a lot of the feast days. But this special, like almost parade, celebrating the Torah scrolls and like dancing in a circle. I found this cool quote that one of the rabbis had said, on Simchat Torah, the Torah scrolls wished so we become their feet. And I thought that was a cool image. Like David dancing when they brought the ark back, Amanda says.
Is that David Schwartz?
That's what I thought at first. It took me. But so before they do the dancing and the music, there is a prayer called the Ata Hareka. It's named after the first verse that it's used in the prayer, Deuteronomy 4:35. But it's really a collection of Bible verses, each prayed in the Torah. So each verse is a service leader and then repeated by the congregation. So I thought this was a good little opportunity for us to do kind of a response with some text. So if you would repeat after me, I'll read these. And when I pause, just repeat back. To you alone, that you might know that Yahweh himself is God.
To you it was shown that you might know that Yahweh himself is God.
There is none other beside him.
Is none other beside
And that's
him.
from Deuteronomy 4:35. Yeah, Tally, I could be doing that because it asks me since everybody else is muted.
Oh,
Hi,
okay.
Tally. I'm gonna put you.
Hey.
Welcome. Your mic is on,
Thanks.
but it's helpful because I can hear you responding.
Okay.
Here's the second one. Who is like to you, Yahweh, of mighty ones?
Who is like unto you, Yahweh, among the mighty ones?
Glorious in holiness,
Glorious in holiness.
awesome praises,
I couldn't hear it cut out. I'm sorry.
awesome in praises,
Awesome in
Praises.
I'm missing something in the middle. Yeah.
Nope, you got it.
Okay.
Wonders, the next doing wonders, blessed are you, Yahweh.
Doing wonders that are you, Yahweh.
Excellent. And the third one, for Yahweh is the great God
For Yahweh is the great God
and the great King above all gods.
and the great King above all gods.
Psalm 95. From Psalm 48, we have, great is Yahweh and greatly to be praised.
Great is Yahweh and greatly to be praised.
In the city of our God, in his holy mountain.
In the city of our God, in his holy mountain.
From Psalm 47, God has gone up with a shout.
God has gone up with a shout.
Yahweh with the sound of the shofar.
Yahweh with the sound of the shofar.
Sing praises to God, sing praises.
Sing praises to God, sing praises.
Sing praises to our King, sing praises.
Sing praises to our King, sing praises.
Thank you. And number 6, and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh
And all the house of Israel bring up the ark of Yahweh
with shouting and with the sound of the shofar.
with shouting and with the sound of the shofar.
And the last one, number 7 from Isaiah, for out of Zion shall go forth the Torah
For out of Zion shall go forth the Torah
and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem.
and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem.
So after they would say, thank you, Tally, especially for let me put you on the spot and doing the response out loud. But yeah, so after the prayer, they would do the dancing and
No
dance
problem.
around. Oh, good. Thank you. Dancing with the Torah scrolls. And the Hasidic masters explain that while they're dancing, the Torah scrolls are actually rolled shut and they're wrapped in their velvet coverings for the entire duration of the Hakkafot celebrations. And this is explained to be because we don't celebrate this holiday by sitting down and studying the Torah's holy words. This is because the celebration of Torah encompasses every Jew, no matter his or her level of Torah scholarship or ability to comprehend and interpret the Torah's words. The Torah is the heritage of every Jew. The day-old infant is as essentially connected to the Torah as the venerated sage, and every Jew is equally entitled to celebrate on this special day. So I love that idea. And in the spirit of that idea, instead of us jumping in and diving into Torah portions, I wanted to have kind of a wider discussion about Torah and how it's impacted us, which I think is a discussion that everybody who's willing can actually participate in because we'll be sharing from your personal experiences. So any thoughts on that so far? On the celebration or the quotes that I was sharing about it? I especially want to share the last quote because it kind of surprised me and I hadn't thought about it, the fact that actually studying Torah wasn't part of the joy of Torah celebration. So I thought that was a really a good take on it, that Torah is for everybody. You know, I think sometimes we can come to a discussion, a Bible study, and maybe feel that we don't have the knowledge to contribute, but Torah is still the joy of everybody. And we all have a point of view. Sometimes we don't have to be Torah scholars to as our joy and our heritage. So let's pedal back a little bit. When we talk about Torah, what are we talking about? Let's get some basics out there. So we're not going too deep in this moment.
So the first 5 books of what is now the Hebrew Bible. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Right. So as many people as are willing to participate, I want to just kind of throw out what stories, or because not all of Torah is stories, what sections of Torah, what do we find inside those books of Torah that you can recall? So let's just start by throwing those out there. If you know what book they're in, bonus points. If you know the chapter, bonus points. But also just like, let's just collect, what is our collective knowledge of what is within Torah, within those 5 books? So Amanda said Israel's origin story and the law. Yes, we have the law. We have Exodus. What other stories do we see in Torah? There's
flood
several.
and Noah's Ark.
What's that, Wade?
The flood and Noah's Ark.
Yep, the flood and Noah's Ark. Genesis 6-9.
Creation in Genesis 1.
Yes, creation. Well, I know there's several stories that have kind of impacted a lot of our discussions at Dust in the last year. Can anybody think of any of those that would land in Torah? Amanda says
Sodom and
Abraham,
Gomorrah.
Lot, and Isaac.
Sodom and Gomorrah, the giving of the Torah.
Abby, what's Genesis chapter 11?
Tower of Babel.
Tower of Babel. There's another one. What happens to Abram in Genesis? Do you remember?
Help.
She needs help.
Abram becomes Abraham,
That's right.
and he has the first covenant with God.
That's right.
We have Jacob and Isaac. We have Joseph. Joseph. We have the origins of the nation of Israel. We have the 40 years in the wilderness.
Oh, yes. Don said the corners of the field. Yep. Amanda said Exodus 2, which Mitch just added.
Shema.
Shema. Yep. Moses dies at the end of the Deuteronomy. I think that's in the last Torah portion that Moses sees the promised land, but dies and doesn't get to go in. So the reason
Yeah,
I wanted to I'm sorry.
We have all of the instructions for the building of the tabernacle.
Yep.
I think that's like 40% of the Torah once you hit
Yeah.
Exodus and Numbers.
Wow. So I wanted to throw those out there to kind of get our juices running about what all is encompassed in Torah. But now I'd really like either something that was said or maybe something that didn't get said yet. But is there a part or a story in Torah that has really impacted you? And how? How has your life changed as you've studied or heard teachings or discussions around Torah?
I think for me, it's in the very first portion of Torah where God looks at the creation and looks specifically after he created one person, Adam, and he says, it's not good that man should be alone. And so he immediately, like, not only recognizes the importance of relationship between him and the creation, but that Adam needs relationship as well. So that's one verse in Torah that I mean, I was single. I didn't start dating until I was in my 40s, and so having 30 years to sit with, the fact that my feelings of it not being good to be alone were valid, and that were part of the Torah story.
Yeah. Yeah, that verse really jumped out to me reading the Torah portion throughout this week as well. And it reminded me of, like, I heard somebody say once that that look at the order of creation and things more and more complex with the animals. I don't know how I said it, but with the animals, and then ending in man, but then woman's created after man. So actually woman is the most complex and basically awesome. I thought that was cool. I'm botching it because I don't remember. It was years ago, but and Amanda said, I know it was Don's teaching on Sodom and Gomorrah when I learned to scrutinize that, and also learned it was not a condemnation of LGBTQ people, but about hospitality. And that helped her turn from bigotry to allyship. That's awesome.
That's what I was going to say too, almost. Can you hear me? Because my speaker's not working, so I'm through my earbuds now.
We can hear you and see you, and you look and sound fabulous.
I'm trying to be twinners with on without even noticing it. I was feeling that vibe. Yeah, so for me it was hearing Don's teaching on Sodom and Gomorrah, but then also like scrutinizing myself and whether I'd ever read it or whether I'd only heard teaching on it, and was like, oh. And then so this time, the most recent time, I suppose, I not only heard the teaching on it, but I read it for myself and broke it down for myself in a different way. I looked at different translations and tried to go back to more original language and things like that. That's what changed it for me. So
That's awesome. And I even feel like there's a middle ground in there too, where sometimes I'm actually reading it, but I'm still reading it completely in the lens or in the mindset of what I've been taught that it says. So I'm not digging deeply like you were describing. I can be in that kind of, it's almost like a lazy, like I'm just reading this because I know it's good to read it and not really engaging it.
I was going to say my studying through Deuteronomy. So my background in the church, they often used, particular laws or commands in Deuteronomy as almost a weapon. And so when I started discipleship and we got to the book of Deuteronomy, I really, really struggled with it a lot. And I actually want to say, I think Don and I spent like a good 5 months on just Deuteronomy. And in the beginning, I was like so resistant because it was just like through it. And then by the end, it had just really, just hearing like the context and different to look at it and how we're kind of connecting it back text. It was just really impactful. And I look at the book of Deuteronomy now with like this whole different lens and appreciation.
That's awesome.
I think for me, there was two different parts of the Torah. I mean, there's been a lot of parts of Torah that have impacted me. One of them in particular is Genesis 18, where Abraham encounters the three angels, and the whole aspect of hospitality being synonymous with worship. It's changed my whole idea, whole process of hospitality, and all my total perspective on that. The other one is a first chapter of Genesis, that God declares creation and people to be good or either very good. In traditional Christian contexts, we are depraved individuals. I think that really has an impact on human psyche, where God in Genesis has never rescinded that. He has never said that humanity was bad. He's been frustrated with humanity, but he's never said that. And I think that perspective is that humanity is fundamentally good versus humanity be fundamentally bad, I think is a huge mindset for me. Traditional Christian mindset versus kind of a Jewish mindset about humanity.
Yeah. That's great.
Hey, Sarah.
Hey, David.
So are we talking about what parts of the Torah we have found significance in or
Yes.
have had an impact?
Yes.
So I've thought about the struggle of Jacob, and I feel like that's had a real impact on me, in the context of his fight or his drive and his wrestling with the angel, and not being willing to let go until the angel blesses him. And that's had a real impact on me in my life, because I've always felt like I was fighting against something, and I've always felt a struggle in my life. I almost feel like that's a theme that's really central to who I am, and I felt that that's an indication that drive and that struggle is acceptable. That it's okay to struggle with the text. It's okay to struggle with God, and it's okay to be willing and tenacious and not to let go.
That's great. I really like that. The idea that like it's okay to be in struggle. Like we're bound to be in struggle here and there and for different lengths of time in our life. And sometimes that's just where we are, and that's okay. Any other thoughts around part of Torah that has impacted you? Awesome. Thank you. Like, I think that sharing our personal impacts of, I'm sorry, Tali, were you going to share?
Yeah, I was going to share just one more thing.
Yeah.
So I guess it's I struggled with whether to share this because I didn't know if I think it's appropriate. The realization that there's so much language in Torah that isn't male. So, which I know that's not a certain part of Torah, but I mean, it goes back to the creation story.
Mhm.
And realizing that a lot of the language to describe God isn't male, that made a huge impact on me. So whether it's, genderless, both I think were big for me in redefining God when God didn't need to be redefined. I just didn't know any better.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think like one of the things that I've been thinking about lately, especially with the Genesis Torah portion, is the idea that there can be different genres within Torah, and that sometimes we're reading poetry, sometimes we're reading that stories that have been passed down, and sometimes we're reading things that are a little bit more historical, although maybe still not 100% accurate. And I just appreciate like approaching the text and thinking about that as a possibility, because it gives me more questions and more desire to consider like the actual context of the text, as opposed to taking every single thing in the text is like, this is like a science book that, or a history book that I'm supposed to take word for word. But when I can step back and say, hey, this section actually just sounds more like poetry. And like, if I were compiling a book of things to pass along to Abby, would I not include poetry that I thought kind of described something from our family? And like, when I see it and I think about that, as a collection, it makes me like move away from less of like the Bible as a library, even though I think that's still a helpful illustration when you're teaching kids about there's different books, but they're all the Bible. But like at the library or the Bible being more like a museum, that there's like all these pieces of art to be studied, and even within the same chapter or the same book, that there can be actually different genre to be considered. And like a museum, you might see different artists, and you don't even always know exactly what the artist intended. And that's why like our living experience with Torah is just another beautiful aspect, and why I thought that us celebrating Simchat Torah as a congregation would be really nice for us to share like how the Torah has personally impacted us in our day-to-day lives, how we've walked away from something and said, yeah, that was a turning point, and this is how I see myself being changed. And in the end, I think that also like contributes to like the joy of the holiday, because I know that like when a lot of the things we've talked about, whether it be allyship or hospitality or just general themes of love and acceptance that we found in Torah, or like David was saying, perseverance, like those are the things that can lead us to happiness in our life. And I'm purposely using the word happiness because if you haven't heard me go on my joy versus happiness tangent, I'm about to go now. because the Abby. So there's one of my turning points in my theology or my understanding. I read this book about happiness, and it basically one by one traced every use of the word joy in the Bible, and every single one can be traced back to this collection of words. I think it was only like 3 or 4 different words, and every single one of those words is synonymous with happiness. So a translation can say joy or happiness, and that's really a modern idea to super spiritualize joy, or I don't know if super spiritualize is the right word, but like there's this like movement, there was this movement in the last several decades about, well, I may not be happy, but I have joy, as if like Christianity provides us some secret to like having this joy that we can, I can have joy even in the midst of hard times, and that joy is somehow different than happiness. And I've thought about it a lot because I understand what people are trying to say, because I think there is, and maybe it's just a lack of our English language to have the right word for it, because in difficult scenarios, there's times where I've wanted to say like, I still have joy. But now, because I've read this book, and that's kind of like been defunct in my brain or debunked in my brain, I tend to think of it more as like a peace, like a peace that maybe I have within the within hard times. And the reason that I think that this is important is because when we act like joy is different than happiness, it's one of those Christianese things that can separate us in not as a good way from like the world. And the Torah is joy, the Torah is happiness, and the gospel is happiness. And it doesn't mean we're going to be happy all the time, but it can lead to happiness. Like when I like show up to help somebody else, it can bring me happiness, it can bring me peace. And I just want to like join the camp of people who are trying to not make happiness a secular thing, because I think happiness can be really connected to our faith. I think so much of what we just shared can lead to happiness, and I think when we just call it joy, it almost can like, it's almost like when we say like salvation or something, and it's like it just gets put into this like faith words that we kind of like talk about, part of the brain, as opposed to being real and tangible like happiness is. Any thoughts on that? Is that new information to anybody, or has anybody else delved into joy versus happiness? David?
I've also found it odd what you're describing. And I think I've always felt that it didn't quite ring true. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I've always thought that I didn't have to always be happy as we define it in our own modern way that it's been defined. I've known there's been many times when I've absolutely not felt what we commonly would define as happiness.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also felt that didn't mean that those feelings I was having at the time were wrong or inaccurate, or they weren't a correct representation of the fullness of my humanity. And so I think that distinction and the way you describe it, I really like that. I think that rings very true for me in my experience, but also in my belief and in what I perceive to be, the core of our humanity, but also the core of our spirituality. And so I appreciate your sharing that, because that gives gives a little more depth and insight to what I felt was lacking in so many ways in secular, not secular, but in, I guess can't maybe say secular along with religion or church, or but But to me, those things, it doesn't seem like we have to always have the secular view of happiness or even the Christian view of happiness in order for us to actually be happy.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, and I think it can be when we're not feeling happy that people expect us to still have joy, whatever it is that they're expecting us to still have in the midst of a difficult situation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing I've always struggled with is if I don't appear happy to other people, then I'm less spiritual or I'm less connected to God. And I believe, and I always have, that the opposite is true. I believe that God created all of our emotions. I believe the accurate representation of who we are as humans and who God desired. And so that really rings very true to me as well.
Yeah, and you just saying that just makes me think too that like there are different things that make us happy and not all be spiritual or super spiritual things that make us happy. And that's okay because God created us and created us with different desires and different things that we delight in. And I think that as we find the things that delight or we feel passionate about, that's actually a gift when we like delight in those things. And I just think that, God looks down at us delighting and finds joy in that, just like I look at Abby and Meadow and watching them delight in things, and it just makes me so happy. And when we find delight in this world, we can model that and give permission to other people around us to be looking for delight in this world. And that, last week we talked about the importance of rest as part of our life. And even part of rest can be doing things that you delight in, because it can be that restorative kind of rest, not always being sleeping, but something that brings you delight. Maybe it's hiking or whatever the case may be. And as we try to like incorporate that delight into our lives and people look into our lives, they can catch that kind of happiness or just realize like, yeah, like, this world, there are a lot of good things in this world that can bring delight, and we don't need permission to pursue those things. We can be a gift in that way.
One more thing that kind of prompted a thought for me, Sarah, was that in struggle we can have the light, knowing that our struggle is for a reason that has purpose greater than ourselves. And the struggle that and the things I want to fight for, and the ways I desire to help others achieve their greatest spiritual actualization is, those are important things in society. There are people who have not been treated properly in the world, and fighting for those causes, it may not at the moment, it certainly won't necessarily be defined as happiness, but in that struggle there can be joy in those, and happiness in those struggles and in those fights, because their purpose is God is joyful. He has joy in us struggling and fighting for those causes that are deep to his.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts that they want to jump in at this point? Yes, another like aspect of this that I was thinking about is um, how our needs, can actually bring delight. And that I know that especially um, in this season of life that we find ourselves in with our country and everything that's going on in the world, that can be a very difficult time for a lot of people. And some people in our community are in extremely difficult situations. But like the idea that when we are fulfilling Torah, when we're walking out Torah, we can find happiness because Torah calls us to care for other people. So the flip side of that for us as a community is that we have to be willing to speak what we need without shame. And be willing to ask for what we need, what other kind of care that people could be giving us. And I know that there are sometimes situations where that's really hard to name. We don't know what we need. It's hard to put a finger on it. But yeah, just thinking about the flip side of it, that actually, like, when we don't speak up with what we need, we're kind of taking the opportunity for somebody else to feel happiness by meeting our need. Because when I'm able to go and meet somebody's need, even if it's like kind of similar, I was thinking about this when David was sharing that, like, yeah, sometimes when I go to help somebody out, it becomes part of the process, becomes annoying or frustrating. Whether it's like the traffic to go get something or figuring out something or other, or to like make it be able to do it. But in the end, I'm always happy that I was able to help somebody else. So when we don't speak up or share the things that we need, we are preventing those opportunities for other people to walk out Torah for us and to find happiness in caring for us, and opportunities for us to build connections as a community. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I guess all thinking about that is how much vulnerability it takes to speak up and speak what your needs are, and how your fear is that, there won't be somebody who wants to
Yeah.
meet that need for whatever reason. And I guess I just think back to being in different church small groups and being encouraged to move around a lot with the same. I don't know if anybody has had that experience, but where you're encouraged to, well, as a leader, you're encouraged to move on to plant the next group or whatever, and how eventually it gets to a place where you're not intimate with the people because you keep moving around so much. And I'm not saying that you can't ask for help from people that you don't know well, but the amount of vulnerability it takes sometimes, I mean, it either takes vulnerability or maturity or both to be able to speak what you need.
Yeah.
And you cannot be mature as a human or in your faith, quote unquote, and have a need strong enough that you speak it. But I think that you're more apt to be vulnerable like that when you are intimate with people. So I don't know why that was my thought. You said any thoughts? That was my thought.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like having that safety, like knowing, a quote's coming to my mind that I can't remember exactly. It's something like, "Oh, the joy, the inexpressible joy of being safe to share whatever you want with somebody, and knowing that they will blow away the chaff and keep what's good." That was the gist of it. But and there, that quote even I think mentions the word joy and happiness, that like being a safe place for somebody to be vulnerable and share what they need. And but yeah, there's a vulnerability, because what if somebody doesn't meet my need?
Right. But I think when you feel intimate to the people, then you don't assume if nobody meets your need, it's not because they don't want to.
Right.
Yeah. It's because either nobody can, or they don't fully understand what you need, or
Yeah.
I don't know, but it just, you don't have that struggle anymore, because these people. So if they can't, it's not because they don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like I was thinking maybe a year or two ago around like when family, like when a new baby comes into a family, and that like precious beginning time, especially like when it's the first child, and like mom's recovering and the whole world has been like shaken up, and sometimes like meal trains happen and things like that. And I think that, well, I'm getting into a couple of different thoughts about like helping people receive help. One of them being that sometimes when we're trying to help somebody, we have to change the questions that we ask them instead of just asking, what do you need? I think that's a valid question. Sometimes I ask the question multiple times before a person. There's something about like my family that like if the first time somebody asks you, it's almost like you're supposed to just say fine. And like maybe the second or third time you realize you want to know. And so like when my sister was going through her grieving after her husband was killed, I would stay on the phone with her and like awkward pauses and just try to think of as many ways to ask how she's doing. So it didn't sound awkward, like I was repeating it over and over again. And it was like the third time where maybe she would like open up to how she was actually doing. And the other part of it was thinking about like just for example, like with the baby situation, that sometimes people like we might look into somebody's life and be like, oh, well, they seem like they've got things together, or like, oh, they have family in town, they must feel really supported, they probably don't need a lot. So maybe a good question is actually to ask like somebody like, are you feeling supported? Because unless you like are intimate with that person, it's not safe to assume that because they have roommates, that because they have siblings, that because they have nearby, that those people are to support them in this time. Or because they look like they've got it together, that they don't need anything. So maybe changing the question to be like, are you feeling supported? And sometimes when we just change the words ever so slightly, I think it throws people off that you might get a more honest answer, as opposed to like asking a new mom, like, oh, do you need anything? But if we say like, oh, are you feeling supported? It's just enough of a mixed up thing that they're not used to hearing that it, in my imagination, it like activates a different part of their brain that they actually have to think about the answer, and maybe you'll get a more honest response, an avenue to be able to serve and love that person in that season.
Can I share a funny, but it's on target with what you're talking about. It's basically, I think you're 100% right. When I worked on the ship, there was a lot of staff on the ship that were from England. And I hadn't really around people from England much. And you know how we say, how's it going? Or doing or whatever. It's like, oh, good. That's the standard answer, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're not really asking how you doing.
Yeah.
Right.
They're just like kind of
all the British
checking off the social.
Yeah. All the British people on the ship would say, are you all right? But they didn't say it like that. They say, you all right? And the answer is, yeah, how's it going with you? Or are you good? Are you all right? But because they would say, are you all right? I, at the beginning, would always be like, why do I look sick? I mean,
yeah, that's how I would respond. Yeah.
Are you all right? Yes. What am I showing something? Like, why are you asking me this? Before I figured out that they were real, that was just really like, how's it going? Like,
yeah.
How you doing? Like, it was just their version of that. But it's so funny how much the change in words threw me off, so that I really was answering them honestly.
Yeah.
And the funny thing was that they weren't expecting me to answer them. Like, are you all right? Actually, I'm feeling a little nauseous. Like, that's not what I'm asking. So yes, you're 100% right. A change of verbiage is enough to like shake people up into answering, honestly.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about anything we've talked about today? I always want to give a little bit of time, because I know when I'm on the other side, like it feels like the time it takes to unmute the mic takes forever, and like by the time I get to it, somebody else has started talking. All right, well, as part of Simchat Torah, the last section of Deuteronomy is read, the final Torah portion for the year, and that concludes the Torah reading for that year's cycle. But it's also the celebration of the beginning of the new cycle of Torah readings. So the Genesis is also read. And at the point of the celebration where they've completed the cycle, so at the point where they just finished reading Deuteronomy, the Torah is concluded for the year. And with the final verse, everyone rises to their feet. And at its conclusion, all proclaim, and I'll just read the English, be strong, and let us strengthen one another. So they've read Torah for the whole year. They get to the end and they say, be strong, and let us strengthen one another. And I love that. I love that
Yeah, I might
as an
say
exit.
that we say that at the end of every cycle. We've done that every year in our Bible study on Wednesday night.
Oh, really? That's awesome. I love that. I've never heard of that. So then at the end of the Simchat Torah celebration, so after so they read the first Torah portion and the celebration's ending, what they say is, the Yaakov halak ladarko. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's, and Jacob went on his way, which is from Genesis chapter 32, verse 2. So what this means, I'm going to read a quote from what I found. In inspiring month of holidays, so we kind of talked about the holidays at the beginning of this that we've been through this fall. So after an inspiring month of holidays has reached its conclusion, now it is time for Jacob, which is really all of us, to take all the spiritual treasures that he has amassed in these few weeks and go on his way back into the mundane world. So I want to pause and I want to take a minute of silence. And I want you to think, maybe not everybody was here for every single teaching over the last month or so, but think of the last few weeks of teachings, from all of Lee's wonderful teachings on the holidays to Andrew's teaching on the Sabbath. And there were some teachings I wasn't even here for. But I want you to think back about all the spiritual treasures that we have amassed in the last few weeks. Everything we've talked about: atonement, remembrance, forgiveness, restoration, creativity, repentance, and even the joy and the happiness that we spoke about today. So we're going to take just a minute to reflect on that. And if you want to share after that, you'll be open to share if you wish. So I'll start the minute now and I'll let you know when it's up. That was probably more than a minute because it took me like 30 seconds to find the stopwatch on my phone. I was not prepared. But did anybody have anything they want to share? Janet, do you want to turn your mic on?
Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I got confused about the hut, the the walls, and made out of straw, and we eat apples and honey. That's on Sukkot.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's next month.
No, I think that just passed. I think the Simchat Torah is like the culminating event after Sukkot ends.
Oh, I thought it was in October.
I think maybe some years it lands in October. I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
Wait, was it in October? What month are we in? What day is it? I don't even know.
We're in September No, no, we're in October. We're in
It is.
October.
What is time anymore? What is time?
I think it
We
was
don't even know.
October.
Gosh, I really messed that one up.
I think Simchat Torah was last Saturday/Sunday, so October 10th. So Sukkot was the beginning of
Okay.
October.
Yeah, I don't.
But you had me fooled. I was convinced for a moment we were in September again.
My mind gets confused really often.
That's okay.
Uh,
So, and Jacob went on his way. I wanted to share one more quote around that. Newly invigorated and spiritually recharged, he, which is saying Jacob, which is all of us, can be assured that in the coming year, he will have the strength and fortitude to unflinchingly confront all the challenges that life presents and bring meaning and holiness to every area and situation that divine providence will send in his direction. So that's what it's saying when it says, and Jacob went on his way. So that's all I have. Be strong, and let us strengthen one another. Thank you, everybody, for sharing.